King Richard and Queen Aurora looked up at the sky when it began to rain. The guards quickly shielded them from the rain as they led them back to the palace, while the other guards helped the men whom Mason had injured and left on the square. As they made their way back to the palace, the king and queen suddenly felt that something is not right. They each recalled Athena and instantly knew that she was Meela's daughter, but why did she become the princess, and what happened to their own daughter? King Richard recalled how Meela and Athena had hurried towards the palace and said to his wife, "Let's hurry. We need to find out what is going on." Not only the king and queen, everyone who had gathered at the square, including the guards, suddenly realized that Athena wasn't the princess and was not so beautiful, and they were horrified that a young girl was almost hung to death, and they were all in support of it. Most of them decided to go to the palace under the rain because they also wanted to understand why Athena became the princess when the king and queen had a daughter. When King Richard and his wife arrived at the palace, they saw Meela and Athena coming out each with a big bag of jewelry and instantly knew that they wanted to escape. The moment Queen Aurora saw Athena, she opened her eyes in surprise. Athena was the spitting image of Meela, and it couldn't be more obvious that they were mother and daughter. The queen recalled that she had always loved Athena like her daughter, but she wasn't so attached to Get because there was something missing. A young girl's face suddenly came to her mind, and she recognized it as Kathy's. "No way," she said, and clutched her chest as she felt an indescribable pain in her heart. She went backwards slowly until the king moved back and caught her. It suddenly stopped raining, but Meela and Athena, who hadn't been touched by the rain, felt chilled to their bones. They knew that they had both been cornered and there was no way for either of them to escape. Athena was the most affected. She had lived all her life as a princess and gotten used to people singing praises of her beauty and falling at her feet. Everyone had loved her, and it always showed in the way they looked at her. She also loved the king and queen, as she had grown up seeing them as her parents, but the way everyone stared at her broke her heart. She could see the look of disgust and contempt in their eyes. Unable to bear it, she began to cry. Meela, on the other hand, could not bear to make eye contact with the king, who was staring at her intently. He thought back to all the love and blessings he had showered on Athena while he was made to believe that he was her father. Such deception. He controlled his anger and said to Meela, "I will only ask this once. What did you do to my daughter?" Meela kept silent and planned that no matter what happened, she would not say a word to anyone. The king and queen were nice people and would have no choice but to let them go in the end. When Meela refused to answer him, the king stared at Athena, who was crying, and said, "Athena, it is obvious that you are Meela's daughter. I want to hear the truth about what happened. What did your mother do to my daughter?" Athena also kept silent and refused to answer the king's question. He turned to one of his guards and said, "Get the whips." Meela still did not believe that the king would mete out such a hard punishment. Women were never whipped in the kingdom, and that was because the king and queen were too kind-hearted. However, she realized how wrong she was when the guard brought 2 long whips. The king pointed at Athena and said to 2 other guards, "Seize her." Athena began to scream as one guard held her 2 hands while the other held her 2 legs, and she was suspended face down in the air. The king ordered the guard with the whip, "Flog her until she passes out." When Meela heard the shrill scream of her daughter, which followed the sound of the whip on her back, she went on her knees and began to beg, "Mercy, your highness. I will answer all your questions. Please spare my daughter. It's not her fault. She knows nothing about this." The king halted the guard, who had only flogged Athena twice. She was left on the ground where she lay, crying in pain while breathing as though she was about to die. No one paid her any attention, as all eyes were on Meela, who was about to answer the king's question. Queen Aurora, who was still clutching her chest, said, "Hold on, Meela. Before you say anything else, tell me, is Katherine my daughter? Is she the real princess?" Meela nodded her head. "Yes, she is my queen. I am very sorry." The queen began to recall all the suffering she had seen Kathy experience. All the times she stood under the sun without food. All the times both Meela and Athena slapped and ordered her around. how they had accused her of theft and how she was almost hung to death. Unable to bear the pain in her heart anymore, the queen fell to the ground and lost consciousness. Mason and Jackson stood under a shed until it stopped raining. The rain had been so unexpected, and given Kathy's condition, Mason knew that it wasn't a good idea for her to be under the rain, which was why he had carried her in his arms and led her to a shed. Jackson was staring at him in surprise as he could not understand what had happened back then. He stared at Kathy, whose eyes were still closed as she laid in Mason's arms like a baby. He looked up at Macon and could no longer stop himself from asking, "What happened back there? I know that what they were doing to her was wrong, but then I saw turn your back on the only girl you had ever loved just to save her? Why? Or did she cast a spell on you again?" Macon stared at Jackson for a while and realized he was right. The fact was that he could not explain it himself. He felt drawn to Kathy, just like the first time he had met her, but he had come to realize that she wasn't a witch, because if she was powerful enough to put him under a spell, she would not have let so many horrible things happen to her. He carried her towards a river while Jackson trailed behind him. When they got to the river, he gently placed her on the ground beside it and began to wash her face. He took out a black piece of cloth. Suddenly he stared at her in shock. He didn't know if his eyes were deceiving him, but she looked so beautiful. She was the most beautiful girl he had ever seen. He wanted to be sure that his eyes were not playing tricks on him, so he turned to ask Jackson if he found her beautiful, and as surprised to see Jackson gawking at her. Jackson could not hold back his excitement of seeing such a beautiful girl and screamed, "Wow! She is extremely beautiful. How could I have thought she was ugly?" and compared her to Princess Athena. "Her beauty is incomparable." Mason turned his head back to the girl who was lying in front of him. She was so beautiful that his urge to kiss her was very strong. He began moving towards her face slowly, but Kathy became fully conscious at that point. Her eyes were still closed, but she could feel the presence of a man close to her, and she felt safe with him. Only one man had made her feel this way, so she asked, "Damian?" Macon quickly lifted his head and controlled himself. He felt disappointed that he had saved Kathy, but the only name she knew how to call was Damian. When Kathy opened her eyes, she saw Mason, too close, and he was staring at her. She instantly sat up and moved backward. She was surprised as she believed that Mason was about to hurt her. Mason saw her reaction and said, "I'm so sorry if I startled you. I won't hurt you, Kathy. I promise." Kathy did not believe his words, because from what she could remember, every time Mason got close to her, it was for the purpose of hurting her. She folded her hands together and said, "Please stay away from me. I am begging you." After the queen was revived, she was taken into the bedroom she shared with the king to rest while the king came out and asked Meela to go on. Meela began to explain how she wanted her daughter to get married to the prince, but after she learned that Queen Aurora would be having a daughter, she went to the witch and took her help in order to exchange the girls after they were born. When she was done speaking, the king said, "I will ask you just one question. Why did you not treat my daughter with love? After exchanging both girls, your daughter got to live as the princess and enjoyed the best life. The least you could have done was treat Kathy like a human. Why did you hate her so much?" "I don't know," she cried. "I really don't know why. I think it was the spell, but each time I saw her, I would get angry. Please forgive me, my king. I made a very big mistake." The king laughed bitterly. "You ruined the life of my only child and almost made me kill her, and you ask me for forgiveness? Guards, throw them into the dungeon. They should only be allowed to eat once every 3 days." After speaking, the king dismissed everyone and went into the palace to meet his wife, ignoring the cries and pleas of Athena and Meela. Jackson saw the helpless expression on Mason's face and stifled a laugh. He stared at Kathy, who was obviously afraid, and said, "Don't be too harsh on Mason, Kathy. You surely recall that you were almost executed back there. Mason was the one who saved you. He risked his life and fought all the king's guards in order to take you away." Kathy stared at Mason in surprise. She also felt suspicious as his actions did not seem right to her. She clearly recalled that she was almost hung to death. At some point she had felt like Mason was the one trying to save her, but she eventually came to the conclusion that it was Damian. She could not rely on what she saw or heard at that time. Bexus, she wasn't really herself. It was no secret that Mason was head over heels in love with Princess Athena and was about to marry her. Why would he go against her and the king to save a girl he hated so much? She suddenly opened her eyes wide as she thought of the possibility that Damian had sent him. Yes, they were all warriors who were loyal to each other above all else. Damian may have pleaded with him to look after her before he left, which explained why. This was the only reason she could think of, and she felt impressed by Damian for looking out for her. She noticed that Mason was still staring at her intently and said, "Damian must have asked you to rescue me, isn't it?" Mason suddenly felt upset that Kathy wouldn't stop talking about Damian. He got up without answering her question and said to Jackson, "I'm going to hunt for food. Look after her." Jackson nodded with a smile and said to Kathy afterward, "Come with me, let's prepare a place where we would rest for the night." Kathy, however, felt that her body was dirty and asked, "Can I quickly take a bath?" "Of course," Jackson replied. "I will keep watch for you outside. Just let me know when you are done." Kathy wasn't afraid of Jackson because she knew that just like Mason, he was also in love with Princess Athena. She had caught him gawking at her so many times. She also believed that she was ugly, so just as Meela had said, no man would be interested in doing anything intimate with her. She quickly took off her clothes, which were already wet, and began to wash her mouth and her body. There was a scar around her neck caused by the rope which had almost been used to kill her. She felt sore around there and wondered how Damian would find her. Would he go back to the kingdom to search for her? She hoped that he would be safe and not be harmed by the king's guards. She wore back her clothes a few minutes later and said in a loud voice, "I am done bathing, Jackson." The queen stared at the king, who was sitting by her bedside, as tears fell uncontrollably from our eyes. "I want my daughter, Richard. Please bring her back." The king wiped her tears. "I have already given the order. The royal guards will search for her thoroughly. They will not return without her, so stop crying, please." "How can I not cry?" the queen asked. "I failed my daughter. I should have known that something was wrong. I never had a connection with Athena, and she was so much closer to Meela, whereas Meela hated the one who was supposedly her daughter. I should have understood that something was not right. How could I watch my daughter being abused and maltreated in front of me? Each time she was punished to stand under the sun, I would look at her through the window. I always had this weird feeling each time I saw her crying, but then I hated her for no reason and never once tried to help her. What kind of terrible mother am I?"